My name is Martha Whitaker. I'm 41 years old. And the night my husband shattered every illusion I had about our life was October 12th, at the Rosemont Grand Ballroom in downtown Seattle. That evening was supposed to be a celebration. Our firm, Whitaker and Pierce Development, had just closed on the largest eco-urban renewal contract in the Pacific Northwest. We'd invited over 200 guests, politicians, journalists, influencers, even a few international architecture critics. And there I was, dressed in deep plum velvet, tailored to perfection despite the fact I hadn't stood on my own in almost 3 years. I should have seen the signs earlier. The business trips that didn't show up on the books. The executive decisions being made without me, even though I was still listed as the firm's co-founder and creative director. But I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch. That Jonathan was adjusting to my limited mobility, that we'd find our rhythm again. I didn't expect him to walk onto the stage, under the golden chandelier I designed myself, with a younger woman in a skin-tight white silk gown, her rounded stomach impossible to ignore. The jazz band's melody trailed off mid-bar. Glasses stopped clinking. Conversations died. Jonathan gripped the mic like a seasoned showman. "Thank you all for joining us," he said, smiling like he was unveiling a new skyscraper. "Tonight isn't just about a company milestone, it's about the future. A new beginning. And I want to introduce someone who represents that beautifully." Then he turned toward the woman. "This is Sienna Hale, our new creative director, and the mother of my son-to-be." My breath caught like I'd been punched. Not because I didn't know. Deep down, I did. I'd seen enough signs. Enough changed routines, muffled phone calls, and deleted calendar entries. But I didn't expect him to make it public. To humiliate me at my own gala, the one I had personally designed and funded, in front of peers who'd once applauded me as a trailblazer. The room gasped. Some stared directly at me, gauging my reaction. Others looked away, ashamed for me. I sat there quietly, my face frozen in a mask of polite indifference. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I smiled. A slow, calculated smile, small enough that most would miss it, but sharp enough for Jonathan to notice. I knew what he thought in that moment. He believed I was defeated. That I was just the disabled wife he'd outgrown. A shell of the woman he married. A leftover from another era, now replaced by something younger, fertile, and exciting. Let him think that. Let him think I was broken. Because while he'd spent months building a fantasy life, I had been quietly gathering the truth. And if architecture taught me anything, it's that a weak foundation eventually crumbles, no matter how shiny the exterior. 3 years earlier, I was inspecting a suspended platform at the Evergreen Point build site when the scaffolding collapsed beneath my feet. The impact shattered my lower spine. I woke up in a hospital bed, unable to feel my legs, with Jonathan at my side whispering reassurances and promises. For the first few months, he played the devoted husband role so well I believed it was love. He renovated our home, hired private nurses, and told the press I was a warrior. But over time, the affection wore off. The conversations shrank. Our firm's weekly meetings no longer included me. I asked to review new project designs. He told me to focus on rest. I offered to contribute remotely. He said, "Just heal, Martha. We'll handle it." Soon, we became he. Then he became he and Sienna. The first time I saw them together wasn't at a gala. It was a photo sent anonymously, showing them leaving a boutique OBGYN clinic in Capitol Hill. Her sweater stretched over a bump. His hand on her back, protective and smug. I didn't confront him. Not immediately. Instead, I started pulling threads. I reached out to Rebecca, a close friend who once worked in corporate finance. I asked her to audit our company's books. Within days, she uncovered hidden transfers. A private luxury apartment rented in Sienna's name. corporate cards used for lavish getaways. A suspicious consulting retainer redirected to a shell company registered in Nevada. And then, something worse. In the back of a folder, Rebecca found something that made my stomach turn: records from my medical account, showing prescriptions I'd never been told about. One drug, in particular, had been linked to fatigue, memory fog, and cognitive slowing. Why was it in my system? That night, I called my physical therapist, Martina. She came over immediately and examined every pill bottle. Her verdict was chilling. These doses are off. This one was pulled off the market last year. I felt my heart pound in my throat. Since the accident, Jonathan had been in charge of all my prescriptions. He claimed it was to ease my burden. But now I saw what he was doing. Slowly, methodically, he had been drugging me into submission. And I let him. I felt so foolish, worse than betrayed. I felt complicit in my own erasure. But as the fog lifted, both metaphorical and literal, I began to wake up. Not just physically. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I stopped taking the pills and substituted them with identical-looking harmless tablets Martina helped me acquire. Within 2 weeks, my thoughts were clearer. I could read blueprints for hours without getting tired. I could remember sequences and conversations again. That's when I knew Jonathan wasn't just leaving me. He was trying to erase me. But if he wanted to wipe me from our shared history, he'd have to do better. Because I was coming back. And I wasn't coming back quietly. The first person I told was Naomi, my younger sister. We hadn't been close for years. In fact, we'd barely spoken since a stupid argument 2 Christmases ago, when she accused me of letting Jonathan turn me into wallpaper. Back then, I was too proud to admit she might have been right. But now, I needed her. Not just because she was family, but because Naomi didn't scare easy. She worked in cybersecurity for a nonprofit, and had a mind like a scalpel, precise, sharp, unforgiving when she wanted answers. I called her the morning after I stopped taking the pills. My voice was flat. "Can we meet?" She didn't hesitate. "Fremont Cafe, noon. I'll bring the hard drive." When we met, she didn't say "I told you so." She didn't flinch when I laid out the photo evidence, the falsified prescriptions, or Jonathan's plans to declare me legally incompetent. She just listened. And when I was finished, she pushed her coffee aside and leaned in. "You have one shot, Martha. If you want to disappear, I won't judge. But if you want to burn this down, I'll help light the match." I didn't hesitate. Burn it. From that moment on, Naomi and I worked together like we were building a high-stakes blueprint. She tapped into old company records, backed up internal emails, and installed surveillance software on Jonathan's personal laptop using access codes I remembered from before the accident. While she handled the digital front, I began preparing my body for war. Martina increased my physical therapy sessions from twice a week to 4 times. She didn't ask why. She just looked at me one morning, saw the fire in my eyes, and said, "Okay. Let's get you on your feet." Progress was slow. Grueling. Some days, I screamed into a pillow just to push through the muscle spasms. My legs felt like wet sandbags. But pain was no longer the enemy, it was proof that I still had power. That I wasn't done. And the more I pushed, the more my balance returned. My coordination sharpened. I could stand for minutes at a time, even take a few steps with support. It was in the middle of all this that I found Jonathan's final betrayal, the kind that turns love into war. I'd left my iPad in the kitchen one night. He must have forgotten to log out of the messaging app. When I opened it, I wasn't even snooping. I just wanted to check the weather. But the first message lit up the screen. "Jonathan, a few more months and the case for full guardianship is solid. The psychiatrist's log is exactly what we need. She's foggy, confused, and dependent. Just the right cocktail." It was addressed to Gregory Chambers, his lawyer. I stared at the words, my fingers going cold. He wasn't just trying to replace me. He was planning to take legal ownership of me. Guardianship. Like I was a senile old woman, not his wife and business partner. If he succeeded, he could lock me away, sell my shares, drain the company, and no one would question it. He had almost convinced the world that I was no longer capable of living my own life. But that was his mistake, he moved too fast. And I was no longer medicated. No longer numb. No longer compliant. That's when I called Mason Blake. Naomi had gone to college with him. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his early 40s who handled some of the state's most vicious family and corporate abuse cases. When I met him at his office, I handed him the files, the texts, the photos. Mason read everything without interrupting. When he looked up, his face was grave. "This isn't just emotional betrayal," he said. "It's calculated coercion, financial abuse, and possibly medical tampering. We're not talking about divorce, Martha. We're talking about criminal exposure." That was the moment I stopped being a victim. We built our plan in silence. Quiet, deliberate, strategic. I filed for legal separation without public notice. Mason served a freeze order on our joint business assets through a temporary injunction, masked by the language of internal accounting review. Jonathan didn't suspect a thing. He still thought I was asleep by 9 and groggy till noon. He had no idea I'd already spoken to a second independent physician, who was prepared to testify that the drug combination I was being given could cause cognitive decline. He had no idea that I had hired a forensic accountant to trace the charity money, donations from kind-hearted people meant to fund accessible homes for disabled veterans, money he redirected to renovate a luxury condo for his mistress. And he definitely didn't know that I had secured the ultimate weapon, the media. Her name was June Weller, an investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing philanthropic frauds and political embezzlement. Naomi arranged the meeting. I gave June the evidence, the dates, the timelines. And she listened. All of it. When she was done, she said softly, "This isn't just a story, Martha. This is a reckoning." We agreed that the story would go live, publicly, only if and when Jonathan crossed the final line. And he did. He sent out invitations for the 10-year company gala. He said, "It'll be great to show everyone we're still strong. The firm needs that image." I nodded gently. He had no idea that the moment he walked on stage at the gala, the world he built would start to unravel. Naomi and I spent the next month preparing like generals at war. She hacked into the presentation software to insert a mirrored drive. I trained daily to ensure I could stand for at least 4 minutes unassisted. Mason prepared the legal suit, set to be filed the following Monday. And me? I bought a new dress. Navy silk. Elegant. A whisper of the woman he married, except this time, I wasn't standing beside him. I was standing against him. The day of the gala arrived like thunder in my chest. The Rosemont was glowing, dressed in floral whites and soft amber lights, an aesthetic I had once curated myself. Our guests arrived in tailored suits and shimmering dresses, laughing over cocktails, trading insider secrets. There was no hint that the very foundation of the firm they admired was about to crack beneath their feet. I sat quietly at a table tucked near the back, exactly where Jonathan had instructed staff to place me. Just out of the way, he had told his assistant. "We don't want her to feel overwhelmed." He thought I wouldn't hear that. But I had heard everything. I watched him schmooze the mayor's chief of staff, shake hands with our newest investors, and lean in with that charming, fake humility he had always mastered so well. His words were slick, his laugh practiced. To everyone else, he was a visionary. A man rebuilding his life while caring for his ailing wife. And then, on cue, the lights dimmed. He stepped onto the stage, clutching a champagne glass like it was a baton. Behind him, a screen displayed the Thomson Whitaker logo spinning slowly against a blue sky. He wore a steel gray tuxedo with a midnight black tie, my favorite combination on him, once upon a time. "Thank you all for joining us," he began, his voice clear, confident. "Tonight marks not just 10 years of architectural excellence, but 10 years of resilience, vision, and partnership." He looked straight at me then. Our eyes met. But I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. "And now," he continued, smiling wider, "I'd like to introduce the woman who represents the next chapter of our firm, our future. Please welcome Sienna Hale, our new creative director, and the mother of my son." There was a hush. Then polite applause, scattered and unsure. Guests turned their heads. Some stared in shock. Others just blinked in silence. Sienna walked into the spotlight in a flowing ivory gown. Her blonde hair cascaded in soft waves, and her stomach, round and undeniable, led the way. She kept her eyes down, her hand placed delicately beneath her navel like a porcelain Madonna. Jonathan kissed her on the cheek and took her hand as she stepped onto the stage. "We're proud to share this moment," he said. "Not just as colleagues, but as a family." That's when I pressed the button. At first, nothing happened. Then the logo flickered. Once. Twice. And then, replaced. The room gasped as the screen shifted to a medical file. My name. My photo. Bold red text stamped across the top. Dosage altered without physician authorization. Murmurs erupted. The applause died. Jonathan turned slowly to look at the screen, his brow furrowed, his expression caught between confusion and dawning horror. Then came the images, a side-by-side comparison of the pills I had been prescribed versus the ones I had actually received. Then Martina's notes. Then Dr. Walsh's signed affidavit. And then, my voice. Not over the microphone. From the floor. I wheeled myself out from the shadows of my assigned table and into the center aisle. Guests parted like the Red Sea. Their eyes were wide, their champagne flutes frozen mid-air. "Martha," Jonathan began. "Sit down," I said calmly. I handed my cane to Naomi, who stood quietly beside the DJ booth, and I stood. The silence cracked like ice. I took 3 steps forward. Then turned to the crowd. "My name is Martha Whitaker. I was once the woman behind the vision Jonathan pretended to sell. I was once the architect of this firm's most celebrated designs. I was also, until recently, drugged by the man who claimed to love me." The screen behind me rolled on. Emails. Financial records. Transfers to offshore accounts. Receipts for luxury vacations in Sienna's name. Even a signed invoice from the Green Habitat Fund, intended for community housing, used to renovate a penthouse apartment in the Union Green complex. Sienna staggered back a step. Jonathan reached for her, but she pulled away. "You see," I continued, my voice louder now, clearer, steadier, "Jonathan didn't just betray our marriage. He tried to erase my legacy. He attempted to obtain full guardianship over me, declaring me mentally unfit, so he could legally take everything I built." The audience was dead silent. Then the doors opened. 4 figures entered, 2 men and 2 women. Dark suits, stern expressions. One held a file. Another held a federal badge. "Mr. Jonathan Whitaker," one of them called. "We need to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation into financial misconduct and medical coercion." Jonathan turned white. "No," he muttered, stepping back. This is retaliation. She's unstable. She's not well." "Funny," I said, reaching for the small flash drive Naomi handed me. "Because Dr. Ethan Walsh just confirmed I'm more mentally stable than the man trying to medicate me into compliance." Sienna looked like she might faint. Jonathan tried to turn to her for support. "Sienna, please, tell them. You know this isn't." But Sienna's eyes were brimming with tears. She shook her head, mouth open but voiceless. I didn't know, she whispered. You said she was sick. You said she didn't remember things anymore. The FBI agents stepped forward. Jonathan's voice cracked. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. Martha, you were supposed to be gone. No, I replied softly. I was supposed to stay silent. But I chose to stand. As they led him away, a buzz filled the room, whispers, gasps, murmured fragments of disbelief. The applause came slowly. Hesitant. Then louder. By the time I returned to my seat, a standing ovation had started. I had taken 3 steps on my own. And crushed a man who thought I'd never rise again. I didn't sleep the night after the gala. Not because I was anxious. Not because I was second-guessing what I'd done. I was awake because, for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. The story broke the next morning. June Weller published it with one of the most striking headlines I've ever seen. He claimed she was broken. She proved she was the architect of justice. The article went viral in under 6 hours. Major news outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Within 48 hours, #StandWithMartha was trending across multiple platforms. I was flooded with messages, women from all walks of life sharing their stories, thanking me, telling me they had finally found the courage to confront their own manipulators. Some even said they had sat in the crowd that night, too stunned to move. One woman, her name was Lacey, wrote, "You stood not just for yourself, but for every woman who's ever been told to stay quiet and smile. You made me believe I could take my life back, too." Meanwhile, Jonathan's world collapsed. Thomson Whitaker issued a public statement, drafted by Naomi and our legal team, declaring a full investigation into corporate misconduct and unethical leadership. His name was scrubbed from the board of directors within 3 days. Strategic partners pulled out. Real estate publications pulled features. Investment capital froze. The Union Green penthouse was seized for audit. The Range Rover gifted to Sienna? Repossessed. Sienna never returned to the office. She issued one press statement through a lawyer: "I was misled. I was manipulated. I regret my role in the deception and will cooperate fully with authorities." I didn't hate her. She wasn't innocent, but she was lost in the same illusion I had once believed in, that Jonathan Whitaker was a man of vision, of honor, of substance. He was a mirage. A salesman in an expensive suit who'd built his entire reputation on the back of the woman he tried to silence. Within 2 weeks, he was indicted on 3 federal charges: embezzlement of charitable funds, medical coercion with intent to obtain guardianship, falsification of financial statements for personal enrichment. I received the court summons by courier. Part of me expected to feel scared. But all I felt was closure. At the preliminary hearing, I stood at the witness table wearing a charcoal gray blazer and pale lavender blouse, subtle, strong. My cane leaned beside me. Jonathan didn't look at me. His lawyers whispered frantically as the judge read the charges. And when I gave my statement, I spoke plainly. I am not here to beg for justice. I am here to state, under oath, that everything I've presented has been verified by independent physicians, financial auditors, and sworn affidavits. Mr. Whitaker did not just betray his marriage, he tried to strip me of my personhood. He drugged me, lied about my capacity, and leveraged that false narrative to access money and power he did not earn. The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker." Or, should I say, Ms. Whitaker? I turned to Mason, who offered a slight smile. We had filed the divorce papers the same morning. Irreconcilable differences felt too gentle. We'd included a clause for moral and financial misconduct. Back in the courtroom, Jonathan finally spoke. "I made mistakes," he said. "But Martha's exaggerating. She's bitter. And she's staging all this to ruin me because I moved on. This isn't justice, it's revenge." I looked at the judge. With all due respect, Your Honor, if I wanted revenge, he'd be in a ditch. What I want is accountability. What I want is protection for the next woman he decides to manipulate. The judge didn't blink. Duly noted. The investigation continued. Bail was denied. Too many assets had been moved, too many offshore transfers uncovered for the court to risk flight. I never visited him in prison. Not yet. Instead, I turned my focus to rebuilding. The first thing I did was remove his name from the company. We rebranded as Whitaker Studio, dropping the Thompson and redesigning the logo into something bold and angular, something that spoke of rising from ruin. Naomi became co-director. Mason joined our advisory board. Martina? She's now head of wellness and accessibility strategy. And me? I stepped back into the design room. The first project I led was the Restore House, our new flagship rehabilitation center for women with disabilities and survivors of domestic abuse. The blueprints came to me in the quiet hours, while sipping tea in my corner office with its west-facing view. I designed every hallway with purpose. Every bathroom with dignity. Every therapy garden with light. We didn't tear down the land Jonathan had once bought to build his luxury Vision Tower. We kept the base, poured concrete, thick walls, and built over it. I wanted it that way. So people would know, from the same foundation that tried to bury me, I created something that could heal others. At the grand opening of Restore House, I walked, onto the stage without assistance. My gait was still stiff, but I didn't need help. The crowd applauded before I said a word. And when I spoke, I said this. Every blueprint starts with a mistake. A miscalculation. But from that mistake, we learn. We build again, stronger, wiser, more beautiful. This place is proof that what breaks you doesn't have to define you. What matters is what you build next. Naomi stood in the front row. Martina wiped away a tear. Behind them, rows of women sat with hope in their eyes. Some had canes. Some had scars. All of them understood. I wasn't just telling my story. I was giving them permission to reclaim theirs. The Restore House opened its doors to its first residents just 6 weeks after the gala. Within days, the halls were filled with voices, soft ones, shaking ones, ones that hadn't been heard in a long time. Women who had been silenced in marriages, in courtrooms, in their own homes now had a space where they were believed. Where healing wasn't just encouraged, it was designed into every brick and beam. The first woman to check in was named Clara. She was a mother of 3 who had spent 7 years under her husband's guardianship after a car accident left her partially paralyzed. She whispered to me during a counseling circle, I used to think I was the problem. That I was too damaged to be trusted with my own decisions. I leaned forward and said, that's what they want you to believe. Because once you think you're broken, you'll stop fighting. She didn't say anything else that day. But the next week, I saw her in the garden, sitting taller. Smiling. And the week after that, she was helping another new resident learn how to use a motorized chair for the first time. This was the world I wanted to build. But even as the Restore House flourished, I knew there was still one last chapter to close. Jonathan. The federal investigation was still ongoing, but the evidence was mounting. June Weller's exposé had sparked a deeper look into architectural firms across the Pacific Northwest. 3 other CEOs were quietly removed in the months that followed due to shady donations, shell companies, and coercive contracts. My story had become a lightning rod. Not because I was special, but because I had dared to show my bruises in public. And still, part of me needed closure. I didn't want revenge. Not anymore. That flame had burned out. What I wanted was understanding. Not from him. But from myself. So, I requested a visit. The prison in Tacoma was gray and sterile, tucked behind a chain of pine trees and heavy fencing. The air outside smelled of winter coming early. Inside, it smelled like bleach and cardboard. When Jonathan walked into the visitation room, he looked like a ghost of the man I had once loved. His suit was gone. His hair was grown out, sloppily combed back. The sharpness in his cheekbones had dulled into something tired, defeated. But his eyes, they still searched for control. "Martha," he said, sitting down slowly behind the glass. "You look awake?" I finished for him. "You told people I wasn't." He flinched. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I was just trying to manage the situation." "You weren't the same after the accident." "No," I interrupted. "I was different. But I wasn't incapable. And you knew that." He looked down at his hands, now paler than I remembered. "I was scared." "Of what?" I asked. "Of losing the spotlight? Of not being able to hide behind the image we created?" He didn't answer. Just sat there, lips parted, breath shallow. "I came here," I said, "because I needed to see you like this. Stripped of everything. Because I spent 3 years wondering if I was the one who was losing her mind. But I wasn't. You were just good at making me believe I was." "I still loved you," he said quietly. "I did." "No," I said. "You loved being loved by me. You loved the power that came with being needed. But you didn't love me. Because love doesn't drug someone into submission. Love doesn't erase." He didn't argue. He just leaned back in his chair, as if deflated. "Do you forgive me?" I considered that for a long time. Then said softly, "Forgiveness isn't a favor I owe you. It's a gift I give myself when I no longer need this pain to remember who I am. And right now, I'm not there yet." He nodded. It was the smallest, saddest motion I'd ever seen from him. "Goodbye, Jonathan." He pressed his hand against the glass as I stood, leaning slightly on my cane. But I didn't raise mine to meet his. Because the man I had loved no longer existed behind that wall. I stepped back into the cold air of the prison lot and took a deep breath. Snow had started falling. Soft flakes, like the universe was quietly covering the past in white. When I returned to Seattle, I didn't speak about the visit. Not to Naomi. Not to Martina. Not even to Mason. Some things were meant to stay where they happened. Instead, I poured myself into work. Whitaker Studio was thriving under new leadership. Our new motto, "Build What Matters," wasn't just a slogan. It was the core of everything we did. We launched a scholarship for women with disabilities pursuing architecture degrees. We partnered with local organizations to redesign shelters, community centers, and transitional housing. Our designs weren't about grandeur anymore. They were about dignity. About access. About making people feel seen. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't designing to prove myself. I was designing because I still had something to give. Because I had never stopped being the architect. I had just been forced to remember who the blueprint really belonged to. Spring came early that year. By March, the lavender in the Restore House Therapy garden had already begun to bloom. I was standing near the west fence, watching a new group of residents arrive. One of them, Amira, a former ICU nurse recovering from a spinal injury after a domestic assault, stood frozen just inside the gate, her duffel bag clenched in both hands like a shield. I walked over to her slowly, cane in hand, and said, "You're not here to explain yourself, Amira. You're here to start again." She blinked, unsure. Then her shoulders dropped by half an inch. That's all it took. The beginning of something new. Moments like that reminded me why I never gave up. Why I stood in that ballroom. Why I endured the pain and humiliation. Because it led here. To this place. To these women. And yet, I'd be lying if I said that final spark of justice hadn't also changed something in me. After the gala, the hearing, and the fall of Jonathan's empire, I found myself invited to more spaces than I ever had before. Talk shows. Women's conferences. Architectural panels. News segments. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who stood up at her own betrayal party and exposed her husband on the big screen. But I didn't want to become a symbol. I wasn't a brand. I was just Martha, a woman who'd been shattered and had to rebuild, brick by brick, muscle by muscle, truth by truth. I turned down most interviews, but I accepted one invitation that felt different, the keynote speech at the Northwest Design Festival, a gathering of the most respected and emerging voices in architecture. The same event I had once been banned from attending after the accident, when Jonathan told the committee I was still recovering and not ready to speak publicly. I had designed half the buildings showcased at that festival. But no one had known. Now, they would. I spent 3 weeks writing that speech. Not just with my mind, but with my heart. Naomi helped me cut the fluff. Martina helped me rehearse my breathing so I wouldn't tremble from nerves. And Mason? He gave me the simplest advice of all. Tell the truth. All of it. The architectural kind, and the emotional kind. The people in that room, they're building cities. But you're building futures. The morning of the festival, I wore a cream-colored suit. Minimalist. Clean. A tribute to the clarity I had fought to reclaim. Naomi sat in the front row, eyes locked on mine. Martina was beside her. And behind them, rows of people I didn't know, but who somehow knew me. I took the stage without a wheelchair, without assistance. Just my cane and a clear voice. My name is Martha Whitaker, I began. And I used to believe architecture was about structures. Blueprints. Load-bearing walls and sleek lines. I paused. Took a breath. But architecture is also about people. About the unseen forces that hold us up, or collapse beneath us. I know, because I once built a life with someone who smiled at my victories, and secretly prepared for my disappearance. There were no gasps. Just stillness. A silence so profound, it felt like respect. I was nearly erased. Not by an accident, but by a man who decided my body's limitations meant my mind was no longer needed. He tried to take my company, my name, my voice. But he forgot one thing. I held up a small blueprint, folded neatly. I was the one who drew the lines to begin with. A ripple of applause. Then more. But this story isn't about revenge, I continued. It's about what we choose to build when the old walls fall down. It's about reclaiming power, not just for ourselves, but for the ones coming after us. For the women who think they're too broken to matter. For the people whose names are removed from the doors they helped open. I finished with a quote that had carried me through the darkest days. You can bury a woman. But if you forget she was the seed, she'll grow back into the ground you tried to erase her from. The audience rose before I even stepped back. It was the second standing ovation I'd received since the night of the gala. Only this time, I wasn't exposing someone else. I was revealing myself. After the festival, my inbox filled again, publishers, universities, foundations. But I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt anchored. I knew who I was now. And more importantly, I knew what mattered. 3 days later, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. Because of you, I left the man who convinced me I was crazy. I can finally breathe again. No name. Just a story I'd never know in full. But that was enough. Because if my pain gave someone else their freedom, then none of it was wasted. And that, to me, was the most beautiful structure I could ever build. Exactly 1 year after the gala, the night that changed everything, I stood at the rooftop garden of Restore House under a gentle spring sun, watching a line of purple crocuses bloom beneath the glass railing I had personally designed. There was no crowd. No cameras. Just a soft breeze, and the quiet hum of a place that had become more than just a center. It had become a sanctuary. Naomi sat across from me at the long cedar table, slicing fruit and scribbling plans for our next outreach program. I could hear laughter drifting up from the group therapy circle below. And somewhere on the eastern side of the building, Martina was leading a walking session with 2 residents learning to stand again. It had taken me a long time to understand something. Revenge might feel like power, but healing, that's the real empire. I turned my gaze to the horizon. Somewhere beyond those trees, Jonathan was still awaiting his trial. His legal team had stalled with motions and appeals, but it didn't matter. His name was mud in every professional circle. No firm would touch him. No boardroom would welcome him. And me? I was invited to chair the new State Commission for Inclusive Urban Design, a committee that would change building codes across Washington to reflect the needs of people living with mobility challenges, trauma, and invisible disabilities. I never imagined I'd become that woman. The one who once sat in her penthouse at 2 a.m. wondering if her life had already ended, now waking up at dawn to rewrite the rules for what healing spaces should look like. The irony? Jonathan used to say I overdesigned. That my blueprints accounted for too much emotion. He thought function was enough. But what he didn't understand, what he never could, is that true architecture isn't just about what holds a structure up. It's about who it holds in. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the cedar trees, Naomi pulled out her phone. "You ready for this?" she asked, grinning. I glanced at the screen. There it was, the first official press release under the rebranded Whitaker Studio name. Featuring me, Naomi, and our full team, mostly women, many of them former clients from Restore House now working in design, therapy, or administration. The headline read, "From Silence to Skyline, the woman who redefined power through architecture and truth." I smiled, then looked around. I saw Amira helping a newer resident with her wheelchair settings. I saw Clara teaching a watercolor class near the greenhouse. I saw Martina coaching a nervous teenager through his first full leg brace fitting. They were all part of this new story. Not built from wealth. Not born of legacy. But forged in fire, grace, and fierce resilience. I walked to the edge of the rooftop, leaned lightly on the glass railing, and closed my eyes. Beneath me, this place thrived. Every corridor a line I had drawn. Every wall, a boundary reclaimed. Every room, a space that said, "You matter." Later that night, I sat in my small studio apartment, lit by soft amber lamps and lined with prints of my early sketches, some framed, some taped up haphazardly like they were waiting to grow into something bigger. I took out my journal. The same one I'd used when I first started physical therapy again, back when Jonathan still thought I was drifting in the dark. And I wrote, "You can be broken. You can be betrayed. You can be left for dead by the one who promised to carry you. But if you rise, if you rebuild, no one can take your story. Not anymore." And now, I want to say this to you, the one listening, the one reading, the one still stuck in a room that feels smaller every day. Your power is not in the hands of those who tried to break you. It's in what you choose to build next. Whether it's a home, a voice, a boundary, a dream, build it. Not for revenge, but for yourself. And when the time comes, when you finally stand, do not apologize for how tall you are. What do you think of Martha's journey? Have you ever felt like someone tried to silence your voice, only for you to rise stronger than ever? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more stories about justice, power, and the truth that refuses to be buried.